Buonasera. C'è una poesia d'amore che ho conservato viva nella memoria fino dall'adolescenza. La conosciamo tutti. L'abbiamo letta tutti almeno una volta sui banchi di scuola. Tanto gentile, tanto onesta pare la donna mia. Sì, proprio questa. Dante Alighieri la dedicò nella Vita Nova a Beatrice. Ed è in effetti il più alto madrigale che sia mai stato scritto. Contiene tutto lo sbigottimento e l'estatica ammirazione che soltanto una creatura celeste può suscitare. L'ideale, appunto, che diventa ispirazione e perciò poesia. Eccola. Tanto gentile, tanto onesta pare la donna mia, quand'ella altrui saluta, ch'ogni lingua divien tremando muta, e gli occhi non l'ardiscon di guardare. Ella sen va, sentendosi laudare, benignamente d'umiltà vestuta, e par che sia una cosa venuta da cielo in terra a miracol mostrare. E mostrasi sì piacente a chi la mira, che dà per gli occhi una dolcezza al core, che intender non la può chi non la prova. E par che dalla sua labia si muova uno spirito soave, pien d'amore, che va dicendo all'anima, sospira. Signori, qui mi vanno dicendo che il tempo è scaduto. Cedo la parola a Barilla.
È Barilla che offre a tutte le mamme la nuova pastina agglutinata integrata con germe di grano.
L'alimento sicuro per tutti i bambini e per tutte le età della vita.
Siamo bimbi sani, sapete perché la mamma si è trovata, ci dà la nuova pasta Barilla che è pastina agglutinata.
Ed ecco per 140 lire la nuova confezione dei nidi d'angelo agglutinati.
Barilla, è questa la pastina agglutinata per tutti.
1920s Paris, the war to end all wars is over, and the straitjacket that has held fast the continent for 4 long tragic years is finally loosened. And Paris, the heart of Europe, lets herself go. To a convalescent world, Paris's eternal beauty is a tonic, its traditional tolerance of rebels, and its friendliness to art and literature a delight. In the City of Light, originality and thoughtful leisure come first. In Paris, it is beauty, it is books, it is ideas that win the day. Said the German philosopher Nietzsche, as an artist, a man has no home in Europe save Paris. Inspiration flourishes in unexpected places, in the music halls where Lautrec found beauty and squalor, in the street cafes where idlers and geniuses have loafed and discussed their craft since the days of La Vie Bohème. People from around the world come to Paris seeking new ideas, new ways of living, a new life. They come to breathe the free air of Paris. places, new people, new ideas, new feelings. What are the life events that awaken us from our routine and stream us forward into new ways of thinking, feeling, and living? How do our life's journeys move us from an old world to a new world? For some, it might be the meeting of a new person, of encountering that one person who changes your life in a remarkable way. We heard of such an encounter in the first selection this afternoon, Dante's beautiful sonnet entitled So Gentle and Dignified. It's a very well-known poem among Italians by the great medieval poet Dante Alighieri, set to music by the great romantic conductor, composer, and pianist Hans von Bülow, and transcribed by the great pianist and composer Franz Liszt. There's a lot of greats there in that one small musical selection. In Dante's poem, which was so beautifully read in the Barilla pasta commercial by the, yes, great actor Giorgio Albertazzi, and can we just take a moment to reflect on the fact that Italians use Dante to sell pasta, and glutenated pasta at that. In that poem, we learned of Dante's love for Beatrice, a woman who was so gentle, so dignified, and of such celestial grace that she changed the lives of all who came into contact with her. Perhaps you know someone like that. Dante writes that Beatrice was the walking embodiment of what it means to inspire a new life in a person. He was 9 years old when he met Beatrice. The poem that inspired that piece comes from a little book called La Vita Nuova, or The New Life, which is a collection of love poems with commentary that reads kind of like a medieval poetry cabaret act with the theme, I met a girl and she changed my life. In it, Dante helps us understand his poems by giving us context, why he wrote it, when he wrote it, what he thought was important about the poem, and how we might interpret it. I dearly love Dante's book, and it inspired me to create this program for this afternoon with selections, musical selections, with commentary and context. For some, a new life may begin by living in a bustling metropolis. We heard that in our second piece, Francis Poulenc's buzzy, charming, perpetual movements, in which the composer celebrates the vibrant and newly modern street life of Paris, about which he once wrote, in Paris, I don't have to be myself. I can become someone new every day. I can become someone new every hour. I can become everyone. As we learned in the video, countless painters, poets, writers, and musicians flocked to Paris in the early 1920s to experience what this vital city had to offer and still has to offer to this day. I think there's a saying, Paris is always a good idea. I think it's from the movie Sabrina, Audrey Hepburn, dating myself. It is wonderful, of course, when positive places and people move us to enter into new ways of thinking and living. But just as importantly, we develop and grow through challenges and disappointments. We grow and develop when we feel frustrated. We grow when we experience loss or impending loss. We grow when we discover new worlds both inside and outside of ourselves. We grow perhaps the most when we find an obstacle in our path. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What stands in the way becomes the way." A new life begins when an old life falls away. We will hear just about such an obstacle and its subsequent path to enlightenment in our next piece, Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata. Imagine you are living in Vienna in the late 1700s. You are just 28 years old. You have been recognized as the most gifted pianist and the most gifted composer of your generation. Your concerts are sold out. An entire city awaits eagerly everything you write. Your name, of course, is Ludwig van Beethoven. However, amidst all this acclaim, you also have a secret too terrible to share. Perhaps the worst thing that can befall a musician. You have been noticing that your hearing is worsening and has been doing so for the past several years. What do you do? Imagine the feelings of anger, fear, and despair that would well up inside of you. In the Pathetique Sonata, we meet a composer who is very eager to share these emotions with us, from the opening grief-stricken chords to the defiant flare-ups in the first movement. We meet a man in extreme stress. We also meet a man who has met his obstacle, and he's defiant. But then, in the next two movements, we We hear something astonishing and something I think we can all learn from. While the second movement begins with a melody of great warmth and calm, it is nervously interrupted with a recollection of the fear and sadness from the first movement. At first, Beethoven calmly returns to the warm theme as if to say, I'm not going to let it bother me. But the anxieties return in another motive, and this time it's a little more serious. What to do? Beethoven, in a moment of musical healing and musical teaching, decides to incorporate the anxiousness into his kind, loving melody and unite the two. The obstacle inspires a new life for the piece. Let me demonstrate. Here is the opening theme of the second movement. It is very calm and serene. Some of you may recognize that it was used by a very popular radio program hosted by Karl Haas back in the day. But that warm, loving theme is interrupted by a second theme that recalls some of the anxiety that we hear in the first movement. We can almost feel our hearts beating a little faster, and it goes like this. Into minor keys, it's recalling again that first movement. So undeterred, Beethoven first says, okay, I got a little concerned there, and I'll go back to that original theme. And we move along a little that ways, and then suddenly you hear the pulse quickening even more. We go from what are called 16th notes to triplets here. It sounds like this. Feel the heartbeat racing there a little bit. So what does he do? He decides, well, let's see if I can combine them. And he does it, and it's a moment of musical magic. If you can listen, this is the theme, now with the nervousness beneath it. How oftentimes we wish that we could do that in our lives, keep the nervousness low and then be nice and calm on the outside. Similarly, in the last movement, Beethoven takes the fraught second theme of the first movement, which sounds like a cry for help. You can almost hear the words, oh, please help me, oh, please help me. And those notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, he changes, he transforms them into something playful and dance-like in the last movement. It goes like this. So we hear change from the ominous to the playful. I wish we could all do that as well. So here we go. As we know, Beethoven didn't win his health battle with hearing loss. He was completely deaf for most of his musical career. But he met his health challenges with tremendous inner resolve. And in doing so, he created the most advanced and beautiful music the world had ever known. He changed the path of Western music to something more interior, more intimate, more expressive. His obstacle became his path, and a new world of music was created for us all. So here is Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata.
Mythology is not a lie, for it is a presentation in symbolic images of the energies of the psyche. What is this tugging that pulls you backwards? What is it that stops you from streaming onwards into life? At the end of the road lies the gaping grave. Will you confront it? Can you? Can you live in the face of inevitable loss? The ancient Greek story of the poet Orpheus is a story of death and rebirth. It is a story of what it means to be mortal, to lose, to be swept along by time, and to confront the world with all its terrible monstrosities, and to learn to live in spite of them. It is a story of the immortal love of mortals. Orpheus was the son of Apollo, and so was a demigod, a poet and singer, which in the ancient world were one and the same. And when he sung, the very stones and rivers wept. The raging furies filled with tears, and the wheel of fate stopped turning in its frenzy. According to the Greek myth, Orpheus had just married Eurydice and was deeply in love. But cruel fate would have it that while walking carelessly through the sun-swept grasses like spring herself, the bride stepped on a snake, pierced by its venom. The girl tripped, falling, stumbled into death. The Roman poet Ovid tells us that Orpheus sang loud his loss to everyone on earth. And when this was done, his wailing voice, his lyre, and himself came weaving through the tall gates of Hades, down to the world of death and flowing darkness to tell the story of his grief again. Ovid says, he took his way through crowds of drifting shades who had escaped their graves to hear his music, until at last stood before the rulers of the underworld, tuned up his lyre, and cleared his throat to sing. O King and Queen of this vast darkness where all who were born of earth at last return. My mission is to find Eurydice, a girl whose thoughts were innocent and carefree, yet tripped upon a snake who struck his poison into her veins. Then her short walk was done. And look what he says of love. However much I took her loss serenely, a god called love had greater strength than I. I do not know how well he's known down here, but up on earth, his name's on every tongue. Then he makes his plea. So at your mercy, and by the eternal darkness that surrounds us, I ask you to unspin the fatal thread, too swiftly run, too swiftly cut away, that was my bride's brief life. Let her come back to me to share my love. Yet if the fates say no, here shall I stay, 2 deaths in one, my death as well as hers. And all of Hades wept. This descent into the underworld is called a katabasis, a literal going down, and is a mytheme which only the gods can endure. In other words, make no mistake, Jesus had his predecessors. Another recurring theme that you'll find in ancient Greek myth is that the gods would punish human beings for the most arbitrary transgressions, just like life. After wiping away their tears, the gods of Hades tell Orpheus that they will allow him to take Eurydice back up to the world of light and life, but on one condition, that while ascending towards the world, he cannot look back at her. Ovid writes, they climbed a hill through clouds, pitch dark and gloomy, and as they neared the surface of the earth, the poet, fearful that she'd lost her way, glanced backwards with a look that spoke his love, then saw her gliding into deep darkness. As he reached out to hold her, she was gone. He had embraced a world of emptiness. She answered him with one last faint goodbye, an echo of her voice from the deep. Goodbye. A few short years ago, a very close friend of mine had a mental breakdown. I had to book him into the psychiatric ward with my own hands. It broke me. During my visits, we would take long walks in the yard, talking. I discerned his all-consuming obsession. Time. The fleetingness of life. As Pindar said of human beings, creatures of a day. He wanted to go back. With all his heart, all his focus, he wanted to go back to a time bathed in golden sunlight. In other words, back to a time that never really existed. At the end of the road lies the gaping of the grave. Time rushes onwards, and we can never go back. If you swim against the stream, you'll only tire yourself out. And we spoke about this for days. You have to go with the stream. Whether our conversations had any impact, I don't know. But I do know that the moment he accepted that the stream does flow onwards and cannot be stopped no matter what we do, he began to emerge from his illness, slowly but surely back from hell and into the light, undergoing his own catabasis. To accept your own mortality is the beginning of living. This was the very moral of the story in the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh. What you seek, you shall never find. For when the gods made man, they kept immortality to themselves. Fill your belly. Day and night make merry. Let days be full of joy. Love the child that holds your hand. Let your wife delight in your embrace. For these alone are the concerns of man. We lose our loved ones. We lose the things that we love. They fade into the world of endless darkness behind us. And in the end, so will we. The past is past, but the present belongs to us. Orpheus tried to rescue his love Eurydice from death, but in doing so, she died twice over. His love died twice over. What the ancient poets are telling us is that most of our sufferings stem from the rejection, the denial, the repudiation of our own mortality. But to live is to courageously move towards the ocean that all of our mortal rivers flow towards and eventually will spill into. So live deeply, love deeply, and no matter what you lose along the way, keep moving forward. And remember, whatever happens, don't look back.
Orpheus is the myth most closely associated with music because Orpheus teaches us that music has a kind of superpower to help us confront our most profound loves, losses, and hopes. The language of music opens a path for us to embark on perhaps our greatest life journey, the path to our inner selves. Just now in the melody from Gluck's opera based on the Orpheus myth, we heard how lonely and sorrowful that journey can be. We heard how Orpheus, in looking for his lost wife, began a journey deep within that will transform his understanding of love and of himself. This fascination with inner states are a hallmark of Romanticism, that period in the 1800s and the early 1900s when writers, painters, musicians, and poets focused their work on the mystery and complexity of the interior journeys we take in this life. The next three pieces I'll play all come from this Romantic tradition. The first was written by Antonín Dvořák, who was born in Bohemia in what is now the Czech Republic. From an early age, he showed a particular love of nature and a reflective mind very much in tune with the Romantic age. He was discovered by none other than Johannes Brahms, and in his later years, he worked briefly in America as the director of the National Conservatory of Music, which was an early effort to bring European-style music education to Americans. Interestingly, Dvořák, in that capacity, was adamant that the path forward for American musicians was to pay close attention to the music of Native American and African American peoples, whose music was to play an important role in the creation of the composer's best-known piece, Symphony from the New World. The eclogue we will hear is inspired by the writings of Virgil, whose eclogues are an example of poetry set in and about what it means to live in rural places. The eclogues are sort of a precursor of country music or poetry. Think of something like, "Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam," where the deer and the antelope play. It's basically that, but in ancient Greece, right? In Dvořák's setting of an eclogue, we find the composer in a meditative and somewhat melancholy frame of mind. Perhaps he is walking in the beautiful mountains of his native Bohemia. We kind of hear the sound of birds and nature. He seems to be lost deep in thought. A dialogue begins, but not between two people, but rather between himself and his surroundings. As it does for many of us when we're out in nature, we kind of begin this communication with the trees and the flowers that we see. There is a surprise at the end of this piece. I hope you will find it as special as I do. Robert Schumann wrote his fantasy for piano in 1836, a summer he spent alone, far from the woman he loved the most, Clara Wieck, who was herself a great pianist and also the daughter of Robert's piano teacher, the formidable and much feared Friedrich Wieck. The story of Robert and Clara's love affair, their many frustrations in trying to be together, and their subsequent union is one of the great legends of the Romantic era. Indeed, in Robert's utter fascination with and devotion to Clara, he experienced that kind of spiritual and artistic breakthrough that Dante had found with Beatrice 400 years earlier. Once again, we have the story, I met a girl, a new life began for me. The fantasy is a moody, multi-layered work which guides us through Robert's rich and complex feelings for Clara, his frustration at being away from her, and ultimately his hope that someday they might be together once again. Let's listen to just a few highlights before I play it. The main theme, or the Clara theme, is rather astonishing because it is just a simple descending 5-note scale. It goes like this. Very simple. I see some of my piano students here. We work on our 5-finger patterns all the time. That's all the notes that he's using. However, he sets this simple motive, just that simple 5-note motive, over this surging bass line full of mysterious passion, giving this theme a kind of shimmering intensity. Here's the opening of the fantasy. Etc. From this memorable opening, we join Robert in a journey of love, loss, remembrance, dread, anger, and ultimately hope. Indeed, at the end of the piece, Schumann adds a quote from a Beethoven song entitled "To My Distant beloved, which includes this quote, "Accept these songs, my love, which I sang for you alone." And that goes like this. In this, we hear Robert's secret message to Clara and also sense his determination to be with her. Remember that Robert couldn't see Clara in person at this time, but he could send her his music, and Clara would have understood this coded message very clearly. Our final selection this afternoon will be a list transcription of a song Robert wrote for Clara 4 years after the fantasy. I will let you decide if you think that Robert and Clara's next journey was happy or sad. Note that I will play the next 3 pieces without a break. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. The fun is just beginning. We have a beautiful reception waiting for us in the Fellowship Lounge. I want to thank everybody here, particularly Tom Gillespie, Steve Moore, and everybody at First Christian for hosting this afternoon's concert. Thank you so much for coming. I look forward to seeing you in Fellowship Hall. Have a good afternoon.